Hello everyone. Unfortunately, Jacob can't be here today because he is moving. He's moving out of his little roach-infested house, and I hate editing, so this probably won't be very well edited. Anyways, so since Jacob's not gonna be here today, I want to record one of my standalone episodes, which is kind of tongue-in-cheek named Do You Know Jesus? So at a cursory glance, the Gospel of Matthew is perhaps the canonical gospel that is the second least concerned about the facts, second only to John. John's version of Jesus is completely different from the ones laid out in the other three, called the Synoptic Gospels, and is often contradictory. However, Matthew is the gospel I'd like to look at today. The first 4 chapters of Matthew are dedicated not to telling you who Jesus is, but to telling you that he is predicted by the Jewish texts, or what Christians would refer to as the Old Testament. Matthew does this by stating events, sometimes events that contradict the other Gospels, and then saying all this was done so it could be fulfilled what was spoken by the prophets, even though nearly every example of a quoted verse or prophecy is taken entirely out of context, and the rest are entirely mistranslated, meaning that the author probably either didn't understand Hebrew, for example, when he's translating Alma as virgin, or referring to the Nazarite instead of Nazarene, which it is in the original text. Nazarene meaning a Nazir, somebody who has taken a vow of purity, as opposed to a Nazarite, which would be somebody who comes from Nazareth, which didn't even exist at the time, or until about 3 or 4 centuries after the creation of the Christian religion. However, the rest of the book of Matthew is dedicated to telling you that if you are reading it at face value, you're not going to get the right message. The book is quietly telling you, I'm trying to deceive you because I don't want you to know the true Jesus. In the light of this, the claim that Matthew is the gospel to the Jews because of its first chapters is probably not only wrong, and if anything, it's probably the gospel meant to keep Jews out of Christianity. In Matthew chapters 4-7, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says a variety of nice-sounding things, and then a variety of really bad-sounding things. The opening lines can be recited by heart by many Christians. Things like, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." Then the pretty mean or questionable things start. He tells you if you don't agree with someone who is fighting you, you might just find yourself in jail for good. He tells you to cut off your eyes and your hands if they start quote-unquote offending or tempting you. He tells you that divorcing your wife forces her into adultery, and marrying a divorced woman is adultery. The beginning of chapter 6 is largely about keeping your religion secret and not letting anyone know the truth about your beliefs. The second half is about not caring about this world or your life in it, because all of this world is evil, and so you shouldn't think of tomorrow because today is full of enough evil. Chapter 7 is like chapter 5, with lots of little good ideas, followed up by some pretty awful conclusions to those ideas. And then at the end of the chapter, it begins to hint that if you believe this stuff, you don't really know the real Jesus. Jesus starts saying that if people find the teachings accessible, if people are able to follow them, then that's the path to destruction. He tells you to beware of false teachers who will come to you with nice words but have a corrupt doctrine. Jesus starts saying that not everyone who calls him Lord, not everyone who prophesied or cast out demons in his name, not everyone who did wondrous works in his name will enter heaven. He says that he will tell them, I never knew you. The goal then, it seems, is not to be doing anything that he's saying to do, but to know him. In chapter 8, you see him selecting who will know him and discouraging people from following him. He begins thinning out the crowds that followed him everywhere. When he does miracles, he tells the people for whom the miracles have been performed not to tell anyone. When people begin to follow him, he leaves town in the middle of the night because he doesn't want you to believe him. Failing that, he tells you things designed to make you go away and not come back. Telling those who value home life that he's homeless. Telling those who are rich that he doesn't want you to own any money. Telling a man who wants to bury his father not to care for your parents. When he is recognized by some unclean spirits, he sends them into pigs, then makes the pigs jump off a cliff so that the spirits won't get the chance to tell anyone the truth about him. And it works. People tell him to go away. This continues into chapter 9. He goes to his hometown, and they too tell him to go away. And he begins to select individuals from groups and tell them to follow him. At the end of chapter 9, he is moved with compassion towards the multitudes of people he sees. And in chapter 10, he begins sending out his top 12 disciples to find more people who are worthy of being his disciples from among the multitudes. He starts telling them what the author of Matthew considers his true teachings. If you follow him, it's going to be hard, you're going to be persecuted, and you probably won't survive. He tells them to be careful about not letting just anyone know the truths he teaches, but to be selective. He says to not even trust your own family with the true gospel, because they're going to kill you if you do. In verse 35 and 36, it says, "For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's foes shall be those of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me." In chapter 11, Jesus tells another sect of something similar to Christianity, that those who manage to get past the being offended by him are going to be blessed eventually. He tells those who see him to say of him, "Behold, a man gluttonous, a wine-bibber, a friend of publicans and sinners." Then he prays and says, "Thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent, and hast revealed them unto babes. Even so, Father, for so it seemed good in thy sight." The gospel he is teaching is hidden. It is Gnostic. Then he goes back to the pattern of saying nice teachings, followed by hard ones to swallow. He says that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Then it gets hard to swallow. He starts telling people that the law is about what's in your heart, not what you do in the flesh. He calls out those around him for being a generation of vipers. "O generation of vipers, how can ye, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh." He then says something very enigmatic and interesting in chapter 12, verses 43 to 45. "When the unclean spirit is gone out of a man, he walketh through dry places, seeking rest, and findeth none. Then he saith, I will return into my house from whence I came. And when he is come, he findeth it empty, swept and garnished. Then goeth he and taketh with himself 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter in and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. Even so it shall be unto this wicked generation." He seems to be saying that the people he is with are evil, and that they will become more evil. Perhaps this is meant as a sort of recognition that the world sucked for first-century Christians, that their lives sucked, and that they should expect more persecution and trouble. The passage doesn't seem to raise the possibility of a future where Christians will be happy in this world. The thing that immediately follows this is that his mother and brothers come to him, and he says, "Then he answered and saith unto them, Who is my mother, and who are my brethren? And he stretched forth his hand unto his disciples, and said, Behold, my mother and my brethren. For whosoever shall do the will of my Father which is in heaven, the same is my brother and sister and mother." So again, he seems to be promising a special relationship to those who push past the facade of the world and the teachings that he himself is giving you. It then says that that same day he went to the seaside, and the multitude gathered, and he spoke to them in parables, which leads to this exchange. "And the disciples came and said unto him, Why speakest thou unto them in parables? He answered and said unto them, Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. And in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which says, By hearing ye shall hear, and shall not understand, and seeing ye shall see, and not perceive. For this people's heart is waxed gross, and their ears dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and should understand with their heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them. He does not want these people to be converted. He does not want them to be healed. He is not interested in the salvation of the world. He only wants a handful of people who have soldiered through his teachings and gotten to know him. The entire rest of chapter 13 is parables about digging deeper, looking harder, not being satisfied with what you find on the surface. In chapter 14, Jesus is moved with compassion for the multitudes and does miracles for them, but then sends them all away. He doesn't teach these people anything. He feeds them and he cures their illnesses, but he doesn't provide any spiritual benefits to them, only physical. Then the famous story of him walking on water happens, and Peter walks to him, sees the waves, is frightened, and begins to sink, and Jesus reprimands him for his lack of faith. This is probably best viewed with a parable as well. Look at past what you see. Look past what is terrifying you with faith, or you will be lost. Chapter 15 is a repeat of the themes of chapter 13 and 14. Chapter 16, verses 1 to 13, repeat the themes again. Then at the end of the chapter, he takes his disciples aside and asks them if they know who he is. And Peter says that he is the Christ, the Son of the living God. This is the turning point. And the rest of chapter 16 has him telling them truths about himself. Then charged he his disciples that they should tell no man he was Jesus the Christ. From that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples how that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed and raised again on the third day. In chapter 17, Jesus is transfigured before 3 of his disciples and speaks with some long-dead prophets, but he tells his disciples not to tell anyone. Then there's an incident where these disciples fail to heal a young man, and his words about his own followers are shocking. O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? This isn't addressed to those who aren't following him. This is addressed to those who have been following him and who have been doing miracles in his own name, and yet he called them faithless and perverse and detests being with them. Matthew 18 starts with a well-known story where the disciples ask Jesus who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And he calls a child and says that to become great, they must humble themselves and be as a child. However, in actuality, if you read this story as it is really written, the chapter division is in the wrong place. If you read chapter 17 and 18 together, you can see that the chapter division should have happened 4 verses earlier in 17 verse 24. The story in the last 4 verses of chapter 17 is directly related to the chapter 18's theme. In it, Jesus asked Peter who people take taxes from strangers or from children. Peter says from strangers, and so Jesus says, then the children are free. This is what chapter 18 is about. It's about developing a parent-child relationship with Jesus, or more accurately, a Roman paterfamilia family with Jesus. Wikipedia has a good summary of the paterfamilia, which I'm going to quote, but if you're interested, certainly read up more on the topic. The paterfamilia, held legal privilege over the property of the familia with varying levels of authority over his dependents. These included his wife and children, certain other relatives through blood or adoption, freedmen, his former slaves that he had freed so that they could conduct legal transactions for him, his clients and slaves. The same mos memoriam moderated his authority and determined his responsibilities to his own familia and to the broader community. He had a duty to father and raise healthy children as future citizens of Rome, to maintain the moral propriety and well-being of his household, to honor his clan and ancestral gods, and to dutifully participate and, if possible, serve in Rome's political, religious, and social life. In effect, the paterfamilias was expected to be a good citizen. In theory, at least, he held the power of life and death over every member of his extended family through the ancient rite, but in practice the extreme form of this rite was seldom exercised. Within this context, Jesus is saying in chapter 18 that not that humility and innocence was admirable, but that you want to get to know him, you must give up all your rights to him, and he must be in total ownership of you as property. He isn't looking for a parent-child relationship as we understand it now, one of love, care, nurture, and so on, but of ownership and domination. He wants you to be his slave or freedman, and says if you do so, then he will protect you. He will not be interested in nurturing you or loving you, just in making sure you are safe from damnation and destruction. And he gives you rights as his freedman if you enter this relationship. Chapter 18, verse 18, Verily I say unto you, whatsoever ye shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever ye shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Then comes the famous line where Peter asks him how often he should forgive his brother, until 7 times, and Jesus says, until 70 times 7. But again, within the context, this isn't about forgiveness, it's about salvation. If you fail to keep the familiar ties with the paterfamilia and with the others in the family structure, you will be kicked out of the protections afforded to the family by the paterfamilia. This is why in the subsequent parable, Jesus says that a king forgives a debt, then a debtor goes and harasses someone who owes him money, and the king takes the man and throws him into torment. Shouldst thou not also have had compassion on thy fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee? And his Lord was wroth, and delivered him up to the tormentors, till he should pay all that was due unto him. So likewise shall my heavenly Father do also unto you, if ye from your hearts forgive not every one his brother his trespasses. He's not threatening non-believers, nor is he talking about your flesh and blood family. He's threatening people who follow him and break ties with other true followers. Thinking about the infighting within the Christian community, this threat is very interesting. In chapter 19, Jesus tells his disciples that they should live a monastic lifestyle. So this probably means that chapter 18 was also meant to be viewed in that context, that you should be forgiving of your brothers in the monastery. He tells the disciples in verse 12, For there are some eunuchs who are born so from their mother's womb, and there are some eunuchs which were made eunuchs of men, and there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. Eunuch doesn't simply mean being abstinent from sexual activity. It means having a deformation or removal of the male sex organ. This is a drastic departure from what most modern Christians view as Christianity, but according to the author of Matthew, this is the true Christian teaching, and anything else is a lie to take you off the right path. Then comes another quotable line. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. Jesus says that to be perfect, you must sell all that you have and follow him. Follow him outside society, follow him to cutting off ties with your family, follow him into the proverbial and literal wilderness, follow him to a monastery, follow him to self-mutilation. This is an incredible departure from modern Christianity and even other versions of Christianity within the 1st and 2nd century. And then he says, And every one of you that hath forsaken houses or brethren or sisters or father or mother or wife or lands for my name's sake shall receive 100-fold and shall inherit everlasting life. He is literally saying to forsake everyone you love, your entire family, all you own, all of society. In the next chapter, it seems to say that everyone, no matter when they do this, will get the same reward as those who have done so from the beginning. In the end of chapter 20 sees him going back to helping people with physical ailments, not revealing any spiritual truths to them. Chapter 21 has him discussing leaving this world, setting up his own nation or family of people who will do what he says without question, chastising anyone who seeks to have religious practice and earthly pursuits combined. For example, chasing the money lenders out of the temple, and saying that those who wish to truly follow him will die. Chapter 22 repeats these themes, but adding the reiteration that those who are in the church are not necessarily exempt from damnation. Chapter 23 repeats the themes of chapter 21. And at the end of chapter 23 and the beginning of chapter 24, we see the historical context in which the book was written, the crisis of faith after the destruction of the temple, and the criminalization of Jewish religious practice that left people wondering what religion was meant to be. The shift from religion being actions you did, like offering sacrifices and obeying the strict laws of purity of the Sabbaths and festivals, to being about what you believed. Matthew has a third option, the Gnostic option. It's not about what you believe, it's not about what you do, it's about knowing the hidden secrets of the faith through seeing past the lies and knowing the Jesus that is hiding from view. Chapter 24 goes on to talk about the end of the world being immediate after this destruction, indicating that the people who wrote this really believed that the world was ending, with a proviso at the end that if it doesn't happen right away, it will be very soon, so don't relax or take it easy, probably indicating by the time the book was finished, people who had seen the destruction of the temple were probably already dying, and many were losing faith that the end of the world would happen. And it again promises that those servants and disciples who lose faith in the apocalyptic teachings or abuse their fellow believers will be damned, despite being followers of Jesus. Chapter 25 repeats these themes. The stories in chapters 21 to 25 are too complex and disparate to go into here, but I really suggest you read this twice. Go to the Gospel of Matthew, and if this has piqued your interest, then read the Gospel of Thomas and the other Gnostic texts, and see what the version of Christianity put forward by the Gnostics is. Then we finally have what many Christians consider the true heart of Christianity, the trial, suffering, and death and resurrection of Jesus. In these stories, we see the themes brought together again nicely. Being a follower of Jesus doesn't mean that you know him, or guarantee that you will not be damned. Simply knowing him and not denying him isn't enough either. Jesus is going to suffer, and so will you, especially at the hands of the authorities, and death is pretty much guaranteed from the onset. Religion isn't about what you do, it's not about the places or practices, nor is it about belief. It's about knowing the truth. It's about knowing the hidden Jesus and doing what he says without question. So, do you know the real Jesus? Do you even want to?